tradition and modernity. I invite Madam Poonam Surie and Madam Deepa Gopalan Wadhwa on the stage for our session. Please, can we have a big round of applause for our speakers? Poonam Surie is an author, independent researcher, and poet. Her professional experience includes teaching at Delhi University and students in schools in Bhutan, New York, and Beijing. She has met and interacted with people from different cultures and the Indian diaspora. Her writings cover the philosophical underpinnings of civilizations, religion, and contemporary Chinese society. Her first book, China, A Search for Its Soul, spans ancient links between China and India, Chinese society and the return of religion there, particularly Buddhism. Her second, China, Confucius in the Shadows, deals with Confucian philosophy and its relevance in contemporary China. Her latest book, Contemporary China, Tradition and Modernity, covers issues ranging from societal to environmental issues and negotiations between the party state and the private sector. Then we have Deepa Gopalan Wadhwa. In the course of her career spanning over 36 years, she handled a wide swathe of issues and subjects related to India's relations with key countries such as Pakistan, China, and Japan. Participated in international conferences and negotiations related to climate change, sustainable development, disarmament, and human rights, and was instrumental in the active promotion of India's economic interest in areas of investments, trade, technology, transfer of energy security during postings in Europe, the GCC, and Japan. Ms. Wadhwa is currently chairperson of India-Japan Friendship Forum and member governing council of the Asian Confluence, based in Shillong, which promotes development and connectivity of the Indian Northeast with its neighbors and serves as independent director and advisor on the boards of the few companies. In recognition of her contribution to the promotion of India-Japan relations, she was honored with the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun by Japanese government in April 2024. We welcome both the speakers on the stage. As we explore the complexities of China, let us remember the wisdom of Lao Tzu. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I request the speakers to begin with the session. Hello.
Thank you very much. Good evening. This is our last session of the day, and we've had a very interesting day. The problem really is being sandwiched between a long day and I think what is going to come after this, which is this concert. So I think that, perhaps the numbers are a little thin, but the subject is something that fascinates everybody, and that is the subject of China. Chungo, the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world as they think of themselves. And as we heard, we have this introduction to Mrs. Poonam Surie, who's written this book on contemporary China, because who doesn't want to understand really what is happening? So, and it's about tradition and modernity and how they coexist and the kind of changes that one is seeing in China. But, before I start on the questions, I was looking at something quite randomly, and I came across this quote from Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, I have no idea why Napoleon Bonaparte was talking in English and not in writing and not in French. But he says, he's quoted as saying, "Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will move mountains. Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will shake the world. And this is what he wrote about China, the Middle Kingdom. So, and China, as you know, just did this, I think, last week with this whole DeepSeek thing. I mean, kind of, I think, caused convulsions around the world. But I have a series of set of questions to Poonam. It's been a really, really very, very interesting book. It's interesting because, you know, it gives you facets of China that we don't know. We normally talk about really the hard stuff. I mean, you know, once heard about geopolitics, we heard about, you know, the military might, the economic development of China, and so on. But these are the other issues. I think these are the supporting issues of, you know, which support really the huge, the growth of China. And Poonam has also had the, I think, had a ringside view, because she spent 3 years between 2003 and 2006 in Beijing, along with Ambassador Nalin Surie, who is here in the audience with us. And it was not, in fact, you know, she's written 3 books, and it isn't the friendship that she made. She continued, and she keeps going back, I think. Poonam, I think that's what's so special, because you keep going back, you know, you interact with academia, you interact with, I think, friends you've had, and people at the common level. And I think that's so interesting to really get a feel of what is happening in China. So let me start with my first question, which is, tell us about the book. I mean, I said something, and we had a sort of a brief couple of lines on the book, but give us a brief synopsis in 5 to 7 minutes on the thrust of the book, and what inspired you to write these 3 books on China, and what are the sort of aspects of China that you focused on to try and demystify China? I'm sure people would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Deepa, for being here, being my discussant. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And, yeah. All right, is this better? All right. And thank you, all of you. And thank you, Nalin, my husband, for supporting me always. And I just, yes, I will speak a little bit about the book and why I started writing about these books, about China. When we were there, you know, it was a mystery. China was a mystery, and I wanted to, the way I was just walking around, my yatra across the streets and the hutongs, and looking at people in the parks. And once I saw a busload of people, and they were just staring outside, totally expressionless. And it was quite a mystery for me, and I wanted to delve into the forum and see what exactly the Chinese were. What was their mindset like, decoding the mindset. And then just got to know some Chinese people, started talking to them, and I realized that they were just very similar to us. Their you know, filial piety, I mean, close family relationships, friendships, everything was, it was a pretty human nature. But yet, the background and their historical baggage was different. And the identity of the Chinese, the past made a sort of a mark on their identity. And so that was something which, you know, I was very conscious about. And so I decided that, and when I went to the temples, the Buddhist temples, I just realized, we went to the Tunhuang caves, and we saw a lot of Indian statues over there, Indian gods. And I realized that there was a very strong connection. And then, of course, there was a lot of research done by me on the Silk Road and on the various you know, historical connections between India and China. And I realized that I wanted to write about that because I think they don't know much. They didn't know at that stage about our you know, society, and neither did we know. What we heard on television and all was about geopolitics and about other aspects. But decoding the mindsets was very important. And then, so this was, the first one was about you know, Buddhism and all about the historical connects. And I was hoping that this would be collaboration and cooperation and a launching pad for the future, and I still hope that it is. Because people are not that conscious of what the connections are across Asia. So then, of course, I realized that Confucius was also an important philosophy, Confucianism. But then this book, which I've just written, is more about contemporary China and how tradition is important, but it has to be kind of rebooted to absorb the modernity and how China has progressed in the last few years. So there are all kinds of problems as all countries face. It's not just that they have problems, but it was interesting to talk to them. And why I was going back every year was because of conferences, and there were people I was meeting, so kept me in touch with what was going on, how it was progressing, and what was deteriorating. So it was interesting, and I just thought that tradition and modernity are two very important things, and how do we connect them to each other? So it's all very well to talk about the economic, balance of things, but eventually, what are the factors of production? It's land, labor, and capital. And what is the most important is labor, is people, human beings. And Professor Richard Thaler talks about this, behavioral economics, which I thought was very relevant. He got the Nobel Prize in 2017. And then a lot of people, academics also realized, which they did even earlier, how important it is to connect culture, traditions, to the mindset of each and every person. It affects you, it's the way you make decisions, and it really makes a difference. So it was all about that, and there were many things, many issues which I realized that I could delve into. And one of them was, of course, the aging population, which is a big issue in China. So the one-child policy, which was then moved to a two-child policy in 2016.
And now it's a
and now a three-child policy has been announced. But the problem is the population is not going to be, forced to have 3 children, because it's expensive to bring up children in China. And also, they feel that this is not something which the government has always to decide. It's a personal decision. So a lot of things came on social media which were wiped out immediately about, we are not going to have 3 children. We don't want to. We will do what we want. But anyway, also there's the Gen Z, or the 996 generation, which means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, overworked, stressed. And a lot of them are moving to the rural areas, which they would move to the city every day to come and work, but they want to stay in a cool and calm and peaceful place. And a lot of incense burning generation, as they call it. They will go to temples, burn incense, and stay there. They're too stressed out. There were lots of people who committed suicide and who did, they were totally hassled and stressed out. So what people are doing now is the youth unemployment rate has gone up. It was, I think, 24%, when I last saw that. And they are now actually, they prefer graduates, young students, who will not expect to be paid that much and who's, will not be so stressed because it's the beginning of their career. So there are all kinds of issues. Then now the thing is that the grandparents who used to look after the children have moved to other cities, or rather the younger families have moved. And there's something called a two-side marriage, which is that you get married, but you stay, the spouse stays with her parents, the wife stays with her parents, and the husband stays with his parents.
This is because of the one child,
yes.
One child family. So this is what happens. Yeah.
Yes. So they don't have to get, no one has to dominate, and also the parents can look after the child, So Yeah, so that is something which is coming up.
So a lot of changes, which,
Yeah.
and you wanted to sort of to reflect on that.
Right.
I must say, it's a couple of things that you say very interesting. You know, you talk about this whole thing of the respect to parents and the importance of family, which is so similar to us, which was what we also felt. So I lived there. Anil and I, my husband and I lived there in the 80s and the 90s, which is long before you, about a decade before you.
Right.
And this was very much part of Chinese society. But you know what was different was that they had just introduced in 1980 the one-child family, the policy. And no one dared to have the second child. They did, but there were penalties, and the state made sure that there were these penalties. And I have this, this experience myself. We had a lady who used to come into work. They were called eyes. Eyes meant aunties, to take care of our children. And the eye came one day, and she was very upset, and her daughter had just got married. And this was also, you have to have the permission of the state. And she had got married, she was expecting, and they found she had twins. And when she went to the hospital, they said, you'll have to abort one. And she was weeping about it. So you're talking about a different state, but I think where much more control was in the hands of the state. But you're talking about a very prosperous country now. And the younger people really now no longer look to the state as they did in those days. So I think that they want to exert their own will.
Yes.
But Poonam, there's something else that I really like the style of your book. Because, you know, there is information and there is analysis, but it's a very gentle style that you have chosen. And it's something like a flowing river. You know, as it goes along, it gives you information, analysis. So it makes it very interesting because you intersperse it so much with anecdotes. And what made you choose this kind of, this style?
Deepa, just, having seen so much stress and so many problems going on around the world, I just decided to have a broader vision of everything. And having been to different countries, met different people, and I just wanted to broaden my horizons. And also during the pandemic, things went completely haywire. And I realized, what is it that is making us live in this world? Is it always aspirations, ambitions, and trying to travel as much as we can, earn as much as we can? It wasn't that wasn't the most important thing at that time. It was more our lives, our families, the peace that we could get to keep ourselves in control. And I think that affected the way I chose to write.
It's very, very charming, therefore, very readable, because a lot of stuff that we read on China is really, hardcore stuff. And I think we have Ambassador Surie, who's been ambassador in China, but also headed the East Asia division. So you know the kind of dense material that comes out on China. So it was wonderful to read this book. I wanted to ask you something. Here we sit in Bhopal. It's about 50 kilometers away from Sanchi, which is sort of, we associate with Buddhism and Emperor Ashoka and so on. And we do know that, Buddhism went from India to China. In fact, Buddhism is one of the 5 religions of China permitted by the state. Everything in China is permitted by the state. But the Chinese tend to call it Chinese Buddhism, rather than Buddhism. And I recall, when we were there was one of the theories this is of course an Indian theory among ourselves, to say that China believed that it gave to the world civilization, it gave to the world a lot of things, paper, gunpowder, spread Buddhism to the East and Southeast Asia. But the only country that it borrowed from, or civilization borrowed from, was from India. And therefore it wanted to make Buddhism something special, to be Chinese, kind of Sinicized Buddhism. So I wanted to ask you, can you tell us about Buddhism in China, and what is this people's Buddhism they talk about? And how did they change it, and what's your experience with it?
So the thing is that when Buddhism first arrived in China, it was not very well looked upon by emperors and by the people who were actually ruling. But then it was also it helped people during those difficult times to believe in this and to feel better during those dynasties. So I think it was just something which they decided to take on, but also they wanted to have their own identity. So it was a combination of Taoism, Confucianism. They all three got, they borrowed from each other, and it became a sort of a common thing to. So what is People's Buddhism? It suits the Communist Party to actually have a People's Buddhism where they think that it's because the Sangh, it will benefit the Sangh, the people, and not just people who go to temples, because they're not spiritual people like us, the Chinese. But they do believe that if they go to a Buddhist temple and if somebody who's sick in the family recovers, then they start believing in that. They go to a Confucian temple if their children's exams are coming up. And they go to a Taoist temple if they have some health problems. There is a big horse over there, a statue. You have to touch the horse at exactly the place where you have a problem. If you have a problem in your throat, you would touch the horse in the throat, and that would solve your
This
problem.
is Taoism, from Taoism?
Yes, yes. And Buddhism, there's a laughing Buddha. They developed a laughing Buddha, medicine Buddha, and different ways of kind of trying to help the population. And People's Buddhism means that there have to be bodhisattvas, or people who help the communities, who help each other, so that the community can benefit. It's not just about a religion or spirituality. It's actually about helping the community. So that suited them. And how is the Communist Party using these religions for their own benefits? See, they have a very firm control over all the Buddhist temples. I know because I have gone and spoken to them. And as you mentioned, about Buddhism, I had gone to the Phi Yuan temple and I spoke to the director. I used to go quite often because I was quite fascinated. There was a monk who used to speak Sanskrit, and he would say, "Please sit down," and he would try to talk to me about
In
the
Sanskrit?
shlokas. Yes. And a lot of monks were actually sent to India to do their MBA, to control the temple economy. And what did I find? What tradition and modernity? I found that all the rooms had air conditioners, in the temples, the monks' rooms. Anyway, the director of the temple said that China is the center of the Buddhist world, and I was totally taken aback. But, I know that there's somebody who controls. It's a very sort of close connection with the party. And it benefits the monks and the directors, and also benefits the party because they have control. And also it's a calming balm for the society because they don't want people to get too stressed and have too many protests. Also, it's $1 billion economy for them because of all the tourism in the temples. And also they charge quite a bit, which is also something which is being, criticized now by people. Because if you have a temple and, you charge people for coming inside, it's not really what is supposed to be a temple, but this is what it is.
It's interesting, really, because it's so interesting you talk about the laughing Buddha, because we associated Buddhism with asceticism and, no attachments and, getting away from material things. And yet you have a very material Buddhism. I mean, they don't, look down upon the material part of Buddhism in China.
Right.
So I think that's how they kind of adopted it the way they liked it, that suited them. Which I think is interesting, but they also give a very, very strong control over all the churches. For example, they also, there's also, of course, Islam is permitted, and Catholicism and Protestantism.
Yeah.
But they have what is called, I think, the patriotic churches, they're called.
Yes, yes.
And, you cannot be a Catholic and have affiliation to the Vatican. It has to be a church or whatever body which is controlled by the party. But it's interesting that you say that now the party finds it useful to use religion for their own purposes.
Right.
So I think something about their soft power. You said, that they talk about themselves as the center of Buddhism.
Soft power, definitely. Theravada, but that's most of the Southeast Asian countries have Theravada Buddhism. So this is not as powerful. The soft power is not as powerful. They have Mahayana Buddhism.
Yeah.
So, but still, it's something which they use for that, for the soft power. And also during the times when people were sick, during COVID times, they did not allow people to come and collect at the temples. But this Buddhist arena, they had a sort of a prayer meeting online, and so people, people kept them. They felt that there was something which they have done for the person who has passed away. They did not want a crowd in the temple. Mm-hmm. And also, instead of, having NGOs give funds for some kind of a problem that has taken place, they do not trust those NGOs. So these are the Buddhist temples, or the Buddhist Association of China is the one who donates funds for these things. So this helps.
The control,
yeah.
and the United, what is it called? That's United Front, isn't it? The one that
Yeah.
takes care of all the
Absolutely.
the non-state in a way of organizations, supposedly,
Yeah.
but controlled by the party.
Yeah. Also, there was an agreement with the Pope, but that I don't think it's been followed, because he had to approve of who was going to be the what they chose for their churches, but it's not been followed, I think. Although it has been extended till October 2024, but I don't think it's been followed.
This is choosing cardinals and popes. Normally, it's actually, it's Rome that decides. But China had an agreement, which must have been the only country with the Vatican, saying that they would decide who should become, bishops and cardinals and so on in China. This is very true, but it's so funny when you look at the history of China and the what they call the Great Proletariat Cultural Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, which basically was to smash everything that was part of history, cultural traditions, and so on. Absolutely. And this was a period that was there when under Mao, and to now, when they see that there is so much to be got in co-opting religion, and I think what happens is probably actually the fact that human beings do need something beyond just material stuff in the world, and they recognize that. But also importantly, I think the issue of Chinese identity. Yeah. Because they keep talking about Xi Jinping. So it's very interesting. So Xi Jinping has been talking about what his vision for China is in 2035. And I think there, at some point of time, there's a Chinese identity. And the Chinese identity is this 5,000 years of civilization. So would you say it's because of that they also find it useful to use religion?
Absolutely. Not only religion, but the tradition. As you know, Xi Jinping has given in his speech, he mentioned the rebirth of tradition, of traditional culture, and very recently. So he's obviously trying to get people aware, the younger generation especially, and also for the dual circulation strategy. What is it? You have to buy local products.
Maybe you can explain what the dual circulation policy is.
Yes, it's not very clear, but it's also the demand from the population should come so that they have enough supply to give them. So this is an internal and an external thing. They also want exports.
They want local consumption.
Yeah.
And so they want, sort of to localize production, consumption, and so on in a way. But they don't want to cut off completely, because, the great advantage that they have is this sort of, they dominate world trade. And I was just reading today that our economic survey of yesterday says that by 2030, 40% of global manufacturing will be done in China. And apparently there's no precedent for this in the world. So, they want probably, what do you say, have their cake and eat it too kind of thing. You want to look up, focus on being self-reliant,
yes,
which is very much part of this strategy. But on the other hand, you've also got to, of course, engage with the world, because that is what gave them all the power that they did.
Viksit Bharat is similar.
That is right.
Yes.
Very true. Yeah. But so in its ambitions to be a global power, China has launched several global initiatives. So yes, I think the BRI was the first, which was about connectivity. Right. And then they had something called the Global Development Initiative, and then the Global Security Initiative, and now the Global Civilization Initiative, which incidentally the Chinese called the Global Civilization which Xi Jinping's name XI, as the Global Civilization Initiative. So could you tell us something about these?
Well, it's basically to, just make people conscious that their civilizational backgrounds or their culture is very important. And it's maybe just an optic, but he wants to connect civilizations across the world and so that they respect each other. But I think the main thing for him was to emphasize the traditional culture of China to the Chinese younger people. And another aspect which would help that is, is also the environment, So to make people conscious of what the traditions were and how they used to work, and to make them conscious of not using too many things which can pollute or destroy the environment. That's also important. For example, there are so many people in the rural areas who still use, things which are perhaps better.
So sort of awareness of,
Yeah.
the importance
Also,
of the
they want
environment.
the rural people to move to the urban, areas so that the middle, goes up, middle class, so that the demand goes up also. So
It's actually kind of a projection of their power. I mean, that certainly is there. And a lot of these initiatives, as one understands it, really is focused on the global south.
yeah.
Which is where they really want to be able to project their power more than, I suppose it's more difficult in more of the developed world. One of the things that, that again, Xi Jinping has had his vision for China in 2035. We ourselves have this vision for 2047. This 2035 vision that he has, you mentioned a few in passing, the fact of the aging population that is there, and the problem of the labor force that is shrinking and so on. What do you think the headwinds are? What do you think the challenges will be for him to be able, not for Xi Jinping so much, or also China, to be able to attain whatever the targets that they have set for themselves for 2035?
I think we just need to, wait and see what happens, actually. Because, the way things are going, the trust has gone down all over the world for the Chinese. And at some point, Xi Jinping might just understand, and, there might be some change in their governance or something. Of course, they talk about democracy, which is a grassroots democracy. So in various areas, these people who are in charge, the party members, they talk to the common people and they get their views. But that is a different democracy.
Social
It's
media
not what
helps
we
this,
have.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. But social media, I mean, does that help with issues at the grassroots level?
I don't think social media has much to do with it. It's just that they give some suggestions, and the people sort of, the leaders, or, they just accept it. Or whether they change it or not is not very clear. But this is the so-called democracy.
That they have.
Marxism with Chinese characteristics, capitalism with Chinese characteristics.
Yes.
and
Everything is cynicized.
Buddhism with Chinese characteristics.
That's very true. But there's this very interesting thing of, the young, she talked about Gen Z. And the book talks about this attitude of the young. They don't want to do this 996. They don't want to sort of work hard as the earlier generation did. After all, the last 3 decades, China has completely changed. So there's some concept that they have of what lying flat.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk about that.
So lying flat is, we're not going to work. We're just going to lie and enjoy. And I don't want to eat too much. I can have a small menu for myself. That would be fine. But instead of me stressing myself out to work. And many of them want to work in the rural areas. They have some, things which the government has, which they can help the rural areas with. And they would rather do that rather than, be in the cities and take on jobs which will stress them out the whole week and from 9 to 9. So some of them have just decided to take it
I love
easy.
this concept of lying flat, of doing nothing. So, what really worked the Chinese economy was this, when you look at it, these Chinese working overtime and there are no rules and, they were, in fact, one of the very interesting things is when we lived there used to be a lot of delegations from the CPM that used to come to China, leaders of the CPM from India. It was party-to-party connections. And one thing I love to say to them, do you know that, that in China there's no right to strike? And this was a wonderful thing, and they'd be quite taken aback because all the red flags that went up in India to know that, this was actually supposed to be a social or Marxist paradise, but this is what it was. So to see a new generation, I think, we all are looking at the greatest symmetries, and we hear these big numbers for China, and I think they kind of revel in the fact that it kind of makes them look very good, and I think all of us are intimidated. There's no question about it, and the huge asymmetry that there is with India now. I recall the days when we first went in the 80s, early 80s. I should tell you that certainly when you went out, I think our per capita was about the same, the GDP was about the same, but we certainly looked far more prosperous than China was. The last question, Poonam, before I open the question and ask audience to ask whatever they would like from you and from me, is to say, what do the Chinese really think about us? I mean, when we were there, there was this, wherever you went, they had this abala hoon, they sang this avara hoon, all over the eastern, Eastern Europe and in China.
Yes.
But since then, I think Indian films have made an inroad.
Absolutely.
They're looking at different kinds of different aspects of India. So tell us, what did you feel? What do they think of India and Indians?
I think they admire us, to be honest, not the governor, but the common citizen, because they're so curious about what happens in India, and they also would love to come and see what. And I've been asked questions like, so how do Indians have big eyes, and what is a datun? How do you use the neem tree?
Very interesting, the datun concept. That was very interesting.
And they want to know all kinds of things, very curious, and they would really like to come and see how the way we function, how our country is running. But that's not true with the, with the party.
Yeah.
But I think, the normal Chinese citizen looks at India with, I don't see any negatives. They're a bit envious because we are the biggest democracy, and they keep seeing what happens and the kind of freedom that we have. But apart from that, I don't think there's, much.
So at the level of the common man, there isn't that animus. Again, in the olden days, what happened was there was so much of state propaganda. So there's this wonderful story of one of our seniors who passed away, Bhasin, Harsh Bhasin. He was in China many years ago. And this was the time we were having the 65 war, I think it was, or 71 war, one of the wars. And he goes to buy fruit from where, there were these standard stores where you could go and buy your stuff. And he goes there, and this was also a time of scarcity in China. It isn't the China of today at all. So there is, I think there happen to be, but there's just about a bunch of bananas there, and he points to that, saying he wants it. And as the shopkeeper is packing that, a Pakistani comes. And the Pakistani also says, are there more bananas? He liked the bananas. And you know what he did? He took that and he gave it to the Pakistani. They were so conscious at that point of time because you could hear the propaganda was very, very strong. And if you were in even standing in bus stops, and of course there was, in those days it was just, TVs, there were just probably one or two shows that you saw, or the radio. So propaganda really affected their minds. But now I think since they have access to so much of the world, they can make judgments for themselves. And I'm sure there is a curiosity about this very chaotic nation in a way that is there. And their films, I think, seeing our films. Can you tell us what are the films that are going there now?
Amir Khan's films are very popular. Shah Rukh Khan was very popular. We had gone to Xinjiang on a trip, and we stopped by in a village, and what did we hear? Songs from Bollywood, Bollywood music. And I had gone for a writing, conference once, and this lady, the Chinese lady, she just put on some Indian music on her phone and said, please dance to it. I was like, oh my God, why? She thinks, I mean, she thought that all Indians
All Indians
are
can dance.
But this dialogue of civilizations that I went for in 2019, Amir Khan was there, and a lot of people. It was actually about the Asian century, where Xi Jinping was, trying to get the Asians together. So it was. There was all this culture and tradition, the music, dance, and everything. A lot of Indians were there, and from other Southeast Asian countries, and.
So I think we should be using our soft power with them,
Yes.
particularly films and things. Actually, there's a
true.
very funny story. This was, I think, must have been the 90s or soon after. Anil and me driving somewhere in a slightly remote part of China, my husband, me, and there were these big posters of Rekha with, her mang, and it was Khoon Bhari Mang. They kept thinking, how would they translate that into Chinese, I mean, the concept of a mang and things. But I think that there is that fascination, and I think there's a lot of, stuff in common between our cultures at the cultural level. Unfortunately, our relations are what they are, but I
Yes.
think to understand society is really important and for that we probably have to travel and see each other more. With that, Poonam, do you have anything else to say, or shall we open it for
No,
questions?
that's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can ask people if they.
Ma'am, as we've seen the controlling attitude of the and the state of China, and be it the child policy or the temples that we were talking about, the portrayal of the temple, or the religion, most certainly. Do you think that has sent? I'm sorry, temples with a stronghold and onto the people. Do you think the ideology of bounding people, bounding its own countrymen, is making a loud presence on the world stage, meaning that China is it making it more powerful?
I think, yes. I mean, for them, if the world thinks that the society, I don't know if I am very accurately understanding your question.
Yeah, could you repeat the question? Could you repeat the question?
Yes.
But in easy way, हम क्या ये समझ पा रहे हैं कि उसका ये controlling nature जो है, वो उस world stage पे उसे और powerful बना रहा है.
हाँ, बिल्कुल. This is what, yes, because, they are not allowed to even show that
अगर internally
simmer.
जैसे
हाँ.
हम कहते हैं कि अगर world politics या international relations में हमें successful होना है, तो हमें domestic politics को या उसको थोड़ा सा violent free या
हाँ, बिल्कुल करना है. Yes, I agree.
ये इस तरह से काम चलेगा तो वो कैसे powerful बनता जा रहा है?
The thing is that, you see, there'll be the younger generations coming up. Things will change. It's not going to be the same thing. The younger generations are traveling abroad. They're looking at different ideologies, philosophies, and looking at the way the world is going. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in the future. This is not going to go on forever, I think. Yeah.
Pura control hai party ka on the media, on what you see of China. I mean, there's so much of control. I mean, it's difficult in today's time, but still, there is certain.
It is becoming more powerful every day after having such control.
Well, economically, certainly. I think, what it's done is, nothing short of a miracle in the last 2 to 3 decades. There's no question of that at all. And I think that is there for everyone to see. Or their investments in S&T, in innovation, so on. I mean, this is very important. That's how you have something that has come out, this DeepSeek thing, which has come, and apparently there are other such technologies, a lot of other technologies. So it has, certainly it's gone down the right path. In fact, that was one question that I had wanted to also ask Poonam. Are there any things that we can learn from China? We are looking at our path of development, and do you think there's something that we can learn?
Yeah, just to go back to what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, it's just there's this unemployment or the aging population. One way of looking at it is that it may not be as negative because they have a lot of technology, which can robotics and various AI and other things which can take over digitization. So it's not that it's that negative, but yes, it is. I mean,
It'll use technology to
yes,
use.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a sense.
That would benefit them as well. So, also, I think they're trying to, change the retirement ages and extend that. But then they need pensions for that. So, that would also affect them, the economy. Plus, they've improved a lot of health benefits. Because now they have, for every family, they have a doctor, a family doctor, who would suggest somebody, a specialist, without them having to go to a hospital and wait over there. So they're trying to improve things.
Yeah,
But-
as I know, so that obviously means that the system's also broken if they want to improve things.
Yeah.
So it's really a country of contrasts.
Yes.
But
But one thing is that, what does power mean? Do they trust the Chinese around the world? That is a question. I don't want to answer it, but
And ma'am, I was just a comment.
Yes.
I was very briefly in Hong Kong last year,
Yeah.
and I realized that people in Hong Kong, they speak Cantonese,
Yeah.
and the mainland China, they're speaking Mandarin.
Mandarin.
And however, the state is deploying people to Hong Kong so that they learn and they get into the culture that Hong Kong has. But the people in Hong Kong, they don't like it. So I mean, that's how it's working, and a lot of things that are happening.
Right.
It's also Hong Kong is quite also ahead
Yes.
in thinking the way mainland China thinks.
yeah.
Hong Kong's had its own
Taiwan,
problems,
Hong Kong,
you know.
Yes, we have to think
Big
of all
problems
those
with the mainland.
aspects. Yeah.
That's right. Could we ask for some questions?
I have a question from both of you. You've served in Japan as the ambassador, and you've done extensive deal of research on China and produced 3 books. Tell us about this. How does China? They're very competitive. How does China look at Japan today, and how much Japan detests China? Do they detest China? What is the real story?
It's an interesting question indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to answer
Yeah,
that. I'll tell you
do
why. Because, for example, Buddhism, we talked about Buddhism. So Buddhism didn't go from India directly. In fact, there was an Indian monk who went all the way from India, but via China to Japan. So, and it's Mahayana Buddhism. So, a lot of the imprint of Chinese civilization is very, very strong on Japan. I mean, that is absolutely without any question. But what has happened in more recent times is an unhappy history, in the sense what happened in the end of the early part of the last century, before the Second World War, the occupation of Manchuria, the atrocities of the Japanese, supposedly on the Chinese and so on. So now what happened is that, there's a period of kind of estrangement after the war between Japan and China. But in 1992, when the Americans make up and then the Japanese and the Chinese establish diplomatic relations, what happened after that was quite amazing. Not diplomatic relations, but I think, it was a diplomatic relations, or they restored diplomatic relations. That's what they did. But what happened was quite amazing. So we were there in the early 90s. I cannot tell you that all over Beijing, I mean, all over China, there were Japanese everywhere. Japanese companies came in everywhere. 25% of the FDI that came into China, that made China what it is today, came from Japan. And Japan thought that they could put the history of the war and all that bitterness behind them. But no, that didn't happen. That's the interesting part of it. So now they have territorial conflicts. And, again, you've reached a stage where there's a certain estrangement. But the Japanese have a very interesting phrase for this, They call it cold politics and hot economics. Because today the interdependence of the two economies is so huge, or rather the dependence of the Japanese economy on China, the largest market, the trade, as it is with every country, is so huge. So they really have sort of made their kind of compromise that the political relationship can't go back to where it is. At least it isn't right now. And there's Taiwan, there are a lot of issues. There's the Senkaku Islands and so on. But, the Chinese are still the largest number of tourists who come. And if the Chinese stopped coming, I can tell you, there are parts of Japanese, the tourism industry, which is completely shut. Very, very intense kind of relationship, and a very complicated relationship between the two. I don't think that the Chinese get a lot out of still saying this whole animosity thing. I know what you heard, because there's so much of propaganda that about a month or two ago, a 10-year-old Japanese child was murdered, was killed while he was going to school by a Chinese citizen, because there's so much of anti-Japanese animus. And of course now the Chinese government has come, and I think the guy's been sentenced and so on. But that's the feeling. There's a lot of anti-Japanese feeling there. Did you feel that also?
Yeah, I did feel that there was, I mean, at that time, I did not really concentrate on that aspect. But what I've been reading is, yes, there was this it's a sort of common thing between the two. But I think now relations have improved because of the economy, because of
Yeah.
economic reasons.
The
So they've
economic-
realized that, they
That's
need to sort of
Yeah.
get over that. So it's a different aspect.
Absolutely.
Next
I saw
question,
a hand
please.
up there at the back.
Yes, sir has it.
Yeah, wonderful discussion, ma'am. Just taking ahead the thing which...
Sir, identify yourself and then start, please.
Yeah, I'm Humendra Yadav. I'm from Bhopal only. So it was very wonderful discussion, and just wanted to take it ahead, like you said, Gen Z or the younger generation, they are not completely in the control of government, if we say so loosely. But we do not hear much voices of dissent or difference. I mean, when you are in China, everything is controlled, so we can understand that no one, or even people are speaking, no one can listen them. It is all censored and everything. But they are in universities, Western universities, there are intellectuals, there are students, they are settling down there.
Right.
So, but we don't hear much about, different opinion about the culture or religion, society, how they are running the state. Why? That's so. Is that culture so strongly, posed in them that even if you go outside China, you will not develop something else, you will not see something else, you will not have different opinion or what?
Yes, total control.
Of the mind.
Well, it does come out sometimes, but immediately it's wiped out from social media. So, by the
No, but
Chinese.
if some Chinese student is studying in American university, then he or she can have different, views on that. They cannot control if he or she is.
I
putting
feel they would. They would.
Okay.
Ultimately, that person would then bear the consequences. Of
Their
that.
family is back there. There
Yeah.
are all kinds of pressures the state can bring on them. So I think that kind of control still continues.
And
I
another,
think-
another interesting thing, ma'am, just a small question. You said in 90s you were there and that development was not there. You said even China was looking poorer than India in many things. But how can this happen in just 2 decades? Like it has gone enormous and it was not started earlier. Does this really
That's
happen?
really what happened. I don't think there's any other country, there's a parallel in history where a country has developed at this pace over such a short period of time.
Right.
I don't think there really is. And that is what, there's so many books and, written about that. So whether that continues is really what is important. I think the lady, a young lady behind you wanted to ask a question.
Hello, ma'am. It was a very interesting session. So I had a similar question like him. I also thought, because from a very layman perspective, if we see, there is a lot of control on the population that China has. But still, whenever a younger generation comes up, now everywhere the younger generation is kind of asking for a higher level of freedom. So don't we see that in China from any, like we said, that there is this concept of laying flat, but that's for the economical perspective. But then also like other social issues as well. If the country is so controlling of the population, but aren't they affected by other ideas, and aren't they revolting against it in any sense? That was my question.
Internal revolt, yes. But it's not allowed to be, made out in the public. That's the thing. They must be talking to each other about it, I'm sure. But
एक दिन तो सैलाब आएगा ना मैम, एक
अब
दिन
वही
तो
तो है ना।
volcano फटेगा ही
वही
फटेगा.
तो है.
So this
We
is
have
this is the whole thing. I think they let them, consumerism.
Yeah.
From you think of the period before to what they have now. So I think that is what they have been preoccupied with by getting rich, and maybe going ahead they'll want political freedoms too.
see this, the 996, whatever, Gen Z, now it will give them a chance to do what they want. Maybe they'll just take on, temporary, appointments, like with the platform economy now, the gig economy. We see a lot of people doing what they want. They don't have to work for any particular company. So that might give them a chance to do what they want and still earn some money. Things have changed, so,
I think I'm going to ask Ambassador Surie. We're fortunate to have him here. He's been ambassador in China. A few lines from you, please, sir.
Yes.
G. But what is your take, honestly? I mean, where do you think China is going? I'll
Do
give
you want
mine.
this?
Ma'am, I'll
Okay.
Okay.
What aspect do you want me to address, Deepa? Yeah, I think Chinese society is going through to use a generally mild word, I think Chinese society is going through a very major set of changes. The party is trying to keep control over those changes, but like both of you have been saying, and there's a lot of it in the book, there is so much external and other social media influences coming from outside, that you can't avoid reacting to these influences. And one of the problems that is happening in China is there are lots of internal problems, as you know, including rioting, people stabbing, mass killings have happened. As you know, a man drove into a crowd, more than 30 people died the other day. Now, the party's response has been a typical, what I would call a law and order response. Crackdown, crackdown, crackdown. And I think, as you said, someday the flood is going to open. Now the issue is, can the party control this internal dissent? Even this lying flat 996 processes, Xi Jinping is hoping that through the use of technology, he can go back to high growth rates. Now, it may have been much more feasible 6-7 years down the line, earlier, if he had not taken on the policies that he had. He's created a situation in the world where the Chinese are no longer trusted. I mean, even where there are BRI projects, they have serious problems, as you know. So I think they've created a situation for themselves where they were very well placed, but they've now put themselves in a bit of a bind. Now, how serious that bind is, it's difficult to say, but I would say it's a serious bind. On the other hand, there are positives. The fact is the Chinese economy is very large now. The fact is the Chinese economy has the size of the economy allows them to undertake projects on the social side, which they could not earlier. You see, China is very well known for higher education, right? But you know, medical system is very poor. Education at the lower level is not very good, not very different from what it is in India. So I think they have a lot of problems, but the difference is they are able to mobilize the party and get things done or keep a lid on things. I think it's worth bearing in mind that in a country of 1.4 or now under 1.4 billion people, there are 100 million party members. If you look at the average, you talk about one party member for 14 members of the population. So the ability of the party to keep control is substantial. The ability of the party to control non-technological systems is very substantial. The problem is technology. DeepSeek may have created a wave in the world, but DeepSeek can also work against the state in China. Look what they did to Jack Ma. The moment Jack Ma became a threat to the party's control, he was cut down to size, and he's not the only one. So I think if you are in decision making in Beijing today, you would worry a lot. You have the strengths, but I think I've always argued that the Chinese know their weaknesses much better than anybody else. No analyst abroad, no matter how much study we do on China, knows China better than themselves. And they do have, as Poonam was saying in the present, they have a grassroots system. It's not as if in Andher Nagari, you know. There is a feedback system. They have NPCs, as you know, at every level, going down to the villages. So they have a feedback system. Question is, are they responding to that feedback system? And there I think the answer is difficult to give at this point in time because they're cracking down on media. They're cracking down on responses. The, 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 the responses are coming through these civil disobediences, movements, these rioting. They don't report the rioting anymore. I noted about 5-6 years ago, they would report the number of internal incidents in the NPC. They stopped doing that. And why did they do that? Because the domestic internal security budget was officially bigger than the defense budget of China. So there is a problem. But on the other hand, the question is, can they maintain control? So far, I think they have managed to maintain control. I think it's in everybody's interest that they maintain a certain element of control. We don't want a China going berserk. So I think the problem again is the Chinese leadership willing to go back to the consensus making processes that they had till Hu Jintao was in power? Pre-Xi. And I think this is where, if you read some of the recent debates, there seems to be a lot of pushback from the older leadership that you need to go back into the old consensus making formula. Now whether that will happen or not, I can't say. But I think if you look at the number of changes that Mr. Xi Jinping has been forced to make in the PLA, including in the propaganda department of the PLA, you would begin to wonder what is going on. These are all generals he appointed. And if he hadn't sacked them in a matter of weeks and months after appointing them, there is something wrong. So there is a balance of positives and a lot of negatives. So far, I think, the politically, domestically, I think he has a lead on things. How long this will happen, your guess is as good as mine. But honestly, we don't know enough. So I think I think we'll get some signals at the NPC next month, in March, in terms of the budgeting processes.
NPC is the National People's Congress.
And from there, you will know how much is going into education. So, then you can start working backwards. Because this 5% growth rate that they have said they have achieved is not true. The average assessment is about 3.5 to 3.8% in this last year.
We can't believe any of their figures.
So,
Yes,
I think
we don't know.
it's but remember one thing, China is not going away.
Yes.
China is not collapsing. China will remain a big, powerful country. We have to deal with that country. And there's only one way of dealing with that country, and that is from a position of strength. And strength does not mean equality. I think this belief that we must catch up with them in numbers is a misplaced belief. It is not necessary. And I think what happened in Galwan demonstrated that very eloquently. So let me stop at that, because
Okay.
I think let's not underrate our strengths. Let's not
Yes.
overstate our strengths. Let's not overstate Chinese strengths or weaknesses either. But we are neighbors. We'll have to manage this relationship. It is our most consequential relationship. To me, as an ex-foreign service officer, it is, I think, a more consequential relationship than our relationship with the United States.
Yes, agreed. Just wanted
Thank
to
you very much,
mention
Ambassador.
just 2 or 3 words which did not come up. Gender issues have been discussed in the book, and also the animal-human interface, which is very important for environmental reasons, connected to Buddhism. I'm not going to waste time talking about it, but also the connection between Sanchi, which, since we are so close by, to Buddhism and to China. An Indian-style Buddhist temple was built in Loyang. That is the place where the first Buddhist temple came up. And that is, the style was Sanchi stupa. So that is a bit of a connection. And how did the first temple come up? Because the emperor at that time saw a shining figure in the sky, and he asked his minister what that was. He said, it's the Buddha. So this emperor sent an 18-member team to find out more about Buddhism, and on 2 white horses came these Kashyambatanga and Dharmaratna. And then 2 people from India, monks. So that is when the temple came up. And then much later, when we were there, this whole thing started, the agreement about the Indian temple. When Jebao came to India, and then there was an agreement, a formal agreement. Before that, I think Atal Bihari Vajpayee had come to China, and that's when they decided. So, yes.
So you have a You have
connection.
something like a. There was somebody at the back.
There's one question sir has to ask,
Okay.
please.
नमस्कार मैम, मैं सिर्फ एक सवाल पूछना
Sir,
चाहता हूँ कि
identify yourself and then.
मैं प्रेम गुप्ता हूँ। मैम, हम उनसे क्या सीख सकते हैं? मतलब ये सारी चीजें
Okay.
तो हैं, अच्छी बुरी चीजें हैं,
You know, I
हम उनसे
think,
क्या सीख सकते
हाँ,
हैं?
एक तो ये सीख सकते हैं कि implementation, we have to learn how to implement things. We have good strategies. But you know, there is, in life, there has to be a balance. I'm not saying that we should take on that dictatorial thing, but you have to be firm about things. And what is yin and yang in Chinese? It's a contrast, it's a, you know, between two things. So you have to, they have to follow the way we do it. We have to see what they do. And sometimes you have to be very, very firm about things. We can learn that from them. That is how they've progressed so much. And also, you know, modernization of the military equipment, that is important. And various other factors which we will have to think about.
Next
think-
question is by Ruchi ma'am. Just a moment, we are getting a mic.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you, lack of democracy, how much of a factor is it? Or is it that the economic transformation of China really has managed to compensate for the lack of democracy? So when we say that sailab aayega, is it wishful thinking on our part or कि सच में sailab आएगा?
Well, the thing is, at a certain amount of that descent has been covered because they are doing well. The younger generations are also doing well. Prosperity is important. They're going along a path where, you know, a roller coaster ride, let's put it that way. So to some extent, that is being thrown back. But eventually, what is important? You know, that is the question. And I think eventually it will be important to, you know, express yourself and to also have the freedom to do what you want and say what you want. So
Very
right
well.
now, it's okay. They've covered it. It's all being covered. But eventually, I think it will have to come out.
Very well. That's what we call a truly, truly insightful session, which has gone long for 25 more minutes. I would say a big round of applause for dear guest. It was a great session that we have had. The last session was a bomb. I would just ask a question to audience, a general knowledge question. A lot of diplomats are here. Most of the people know the answer, but still, I would go ahead. What is the training institute of the IFS officers called? Anybody from the audience? Yes, yes, sir. Please, आप आ जाइए आगे.
एक quiz question नहीं पूछना.
ये वही है, आप भी पूछ सकते हैं मैम.
What did Damu have to do with China?
The name Damo.
Yeah. Does anyone know that? Otherwise, he will win this quiz. Damu. Bodhidharma. Tell the story
Shaolin
of
Temple,
Bodhidharma.
Kung Fu, all of that, you know, is one of our early exports.
Yes.
Anyway.
सर प्लीज आप आ जाइए.
आप आ जाओ. आपका मिल गया.
किताब दे दें. ये डेल कार्नेजी की किताब है. आप लोग मैम एक फोटो आपके लिए आ जाएं प्लीज. यस.
Why did you give it? You're supposed to give it to him.
Again, a big round of applause for sir. This quiz winner is taking home Living an Enriched Life by Dale Carnegie, a timeless guide to bounding self-confidence, setting goals and cultivating positive attitude. Well, it's time for memento giving to our guest. I request Rima Huja ma'am to present a memento to our esteemed speakers in gratitude. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. That was fascinating. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. So, if you can sum up what it is, but they all know it by now.
Yes, ma'am. Created for Bhopal Literature Festival by Padma Shri Bhil artist Bhuri Bai. This artwork symbolizes the deep connection between nature, humanity, and the environment.
cross, but we'll need both of you for this.
To our remarkable speakers, thank you for your wisdom and insights. This memento honors your contributions and the lasting impact of your words. Thank you once again for joining us at Vagarth.
Just stand up. I use a lot of old-fashioned.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I would convey your message.
Thank you all. Thank you for your patience. We all have an invite, I think, if you do, for because all your stuff. Yeah. And then take off. We have a dinner. Yeah, sure. Deepa.